When the protagonist first heard he would be getting an alien roommate, he didn't quite know what to expect. Living in a world where humans and aliens coexisted, it was nothing unusual. But this was a whole new experience. His new roommate, Zalora, was unlike anyone he had ever met, an alien from a distant galaxy, who was not only highly intelligent but also extremely curious about human life. At first it seemed like any normal day. He had just moved into his new apartment and was unpacking his things. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Zalora standing there, her tall, graceful form towering slightly above him. Her pale blue skin shimmered softly in the light, and her large eyes were full of wonder. She had a natural beauty that was completely different from anything human, yet there was something captivating about it. She was wearing a simple jumpsuit, a standard alien attire that covered most of her body, but left her arms and legs exposed. Her outfit didn't quite match human fashion, but the protagonist thought nothing of it at first. "Hello, I'm Zalora," she said, her voice calm but with a curious edge to it. "I've read about Earth's customs, but I have some questions. I hope you don't mind me staying with you." He smiled, feeling a bit nervous but also intrigued. "Of course, welcome. I'm happy to have you as my roommate." The first few days went smoothly, with Zalora asking questions about the most mundane things. She was fascinated by human food, human ways of communication, and especially the way humans dressed. She asked about clothing every day, as if trying to understand the significance behind it. "What is the purpose of these garments you wear?" she asked one evening as they sat in the living room. She gestured to the protagonist's simple t-shirt and jeans. "Your body is perfectly fine without them. I've seen humans without clothing, but why do you all choose to wear these?" The question took him by surprise. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it before, but the idea of someone questioning something so fundamental was unusual. He paused for a moment, thinking carefully. "Well," he began, "clothing serves many purposes. It keeps us warm, protects us from the elements, and, well, it's also a way for us to express ourselves, like with fashion. People wear different things depending on the occasion, the weather, or even their mood." Zalora seemed fascinated by the idea. She stared at him with wide eyes, trying to comprehend it all. "So, you wear clothes because you want to show the world who you are?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Why don't you just show your true form? Why hide it?" The question was innocent, but it made him feel strangely uncomfortable. "It's not about hiding anything, it's just part of who we are. It's how we fit in with society, you know? It's like a rule." Zalora wasn't satisfied with that answer. "But what if your society is wrong?" she asked, her tone almost challenging. "What if you don't need clothes at all? In my culture, we never wear anything because we don't need to. Our bodies are perfect as they are," he tried to explain. Further, but it was clear that Zalora wasn't convinced. She seemed to see no reason why she should conform to human customs. The next morning, when the protagonist came out of his bedroom, he was met with an unexpected sight. Zalora was standing in the living room, completely naked, examining herself in the mirror. "Zalora, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice full of surprise and embarrassment. She turned to him, her eyes unblinking and curious. "I'm testing your theory. You said clothes are to express who we are, but I don't need them. I feel fine without them. This is who I am. No layers, no coverings, just me." The protagonist's face turned red. He didn't know what to say. But people will see you. You can't walk around like that." Zalora looked at him in confusion. "Why not? What's the problem with being natural? If clothes are only for expression, then why not express myself in my natural form?" The protagonist tried to reason with her, explaining that society had certain expectations and that going out without clothes could make others uncomfortable. But Zalora was undeterred. "Then I won't wear clothes. I don't see why I have to. Humans are so strange with their unnecessary coverings. It wasn't that she was being defiant. Zalora simply didn't understand the need for clothing. To her, it seemed like a pointless human invention. The protagonist, though, was struggling to find a way to explain why it mattered so much. He knew there were societal rules, but Zalora's disregard for those rules felt like a challenge to everything he had grown up believing. The situation grew more complicated when he realized that Zalora wasn't going to change her mind. She insisted on walking around the apartment without clothes, making it increasingly difficult for him to ignore the issue. He couldn't deny that she was comfortable in her own skin, but he also knew there were boundaries to what was socially acceptable. It became clear that Zalora's lack of understanding was going to lead to some difficult moments ahead. The protagonist didn't know how to convince her to wear clothes or if he even should. But one thing was for sure, life with Zalora was going to be anything but ordinary. The next few days were filled with more confusion than the protagonist had ever imagined. Zalora, despite all his attempts to explain human culture and the importance of clothing, continued to walk around the apartment without so much as a hint of embarrassment. She would occasionally ask him about the different clothes he wore, and although the protagonist tried to explain the social expectations, her understanding seemed to miss the point entirely. To her, clothes were merely a human invention that seemed unnecessary. One afternoon, the protagonist returned home from work to find Zalora standing in front of the living room mirror, trying to figure out how to wear a shirt he had given her, as a suggestion. It was a simple t-shirt, something casual, but Zalora's attempt to wear it was nothing short of a disaster. The shirt was clearly too big for her slender alien form, and she had it on backward. She tilted her head as she tried to make sense of the strange human garment. "Zalora, you're wearing it wrong," he said, trying to hold back a laugh. She turned to him with a serious look. "I don't understand why these things need to be worn in the first place. If your body is functioning fine without them, why do you insist on wrapping yourself in these fabrics?" The protagonist sighed and sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. He had tried everything. He had shown her how clothes were supposed to fit, explained how they helped. People blend into society, and even gone as far as comparing it to how certain animals had fur or feathers for warmth. But it seemed like none of it made sense to Zalora. "People just wear them because that's how we do things," he said, trying to sound calm. "It's about more than comfort. It's about fitting in, blending in with others. Without them, you'd stand out in a way that could make others uncomfortable." Zalora didn't seem convinced. "But I want to stand out. Why would I want to look like everyone else? Your people cover themselves with clothing, but I see no reason to do the same." She gestured to the shirt. "This feels restrictive. I'd rather not wear it." The protagonist didn't know what to say anymore. Zalora wasn't being rude or defiant. She just genuinely didn't understand. Her alien culture had no concept of modesty or covering the body. To her, clothing was a human custom, not a necessity. Later, that day he noticed Zalora in the kitchen humming as she prepared a meal. She had no intention of putting on clothes, and she wasn't concerned about anyone seeing her. The protagonist realized that, although he had gotten used to her presence, her complete lack of concern for societal norms was starting to make him uncomfortable. He hesitated before speaking, unsure how to handle the situation. "Zalora, listen. You can't just walk around like this all the time. People will think you're strange. You have to respect our customs. This isn't just about comfort. It's about fitting into society." Zalora stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. Her large eyes, wide with curiosity, looked at him with an intensity that was hard to ignore. "Why is it strange? I've been living like this for my entire life, and nothing has ever been wrong with it. Why are your rules so different from mine? Why can't I live the way I'm comfortable?" The protagonist opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had always followed the norms, never questioned them. It never occurred to him that something as simple as clothing could feel so alien to someone else. He rubbed his temples in frustration. It's just how society works. Without clothes, people might think you're doing something inappropriate. It's like a respect thing. Zalora's eyes narrowed as she thought for a moment. Respect? You think I'm disrespecting your people by not covering myself? Her voice remained calm, but there was a sharpness in it now. I'm not doing this to offend anyone. I'm doing what feels natural to me. Isn't that what matters? Her words lingered in the air, and the protagonist couldn't deny the truth in them. He had been so wrapped up in what others expected that he hadn't stopped to consider why people actually followed these customs in the first place. Was it truly about respect, or had it become a habit? He thought about the many times he'd heard people complain about fashion trends or the pressure to conform to certain standards. Maybe Zalora had a point. Maybe humans had become so used to their clothes that they no longer questioned why they wore them. Feeling the weight of the conversation, the protagonist decided to take a different approach. Okay, let's compromise, he said. You don't have to wear human clothes if you don't want to, but maybe we could find something that feels comfortable for you and still works in public. We'll find a middle ground. Zalora raised an eyebrow. A compromise? I'm not sure what that would look like, but I'm open to the idea. You're willing to work with me on this? The protagonist nodded. Yeah, we'll figure something out. They spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas. Zalora was still skeptical, but she was willing to try. The protagonist found a tailor who specialized in alien garments, and the two of them visited the shop. The designer, fascinated by Zalora's unique physiology, suggested a few styles that could blend human fashion with alien functionality. Despite her initial doubts, Zalora was intrigued by the idea of designing something truly her own, something that was both comfortable and respectful of human customs without compromising her natural form. As they walked out of the shop, the protagonist could sense that Zalora was starting to open up to the idea of blending her identity with the human world, but it was clear she wasn't ready to abandon her roots entirely. Maybe I'll give it a try, Zalora said with a smirk. But only if it's something I can move freely in, no more of these human restrictions. The protagonist chuckled. I think we can manage that. It was a small victory, but it felt like progress. As they headed back to the apartment, the protagonist couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. Maybe living with Zalora wasn't as complicated as he had once thought. Maybe it was just about learning to see things from a different perspective. The next day, after their shopping trip, Zalora seemed a little more open to the idea of wearing clothes, though her version of clothes was still very different from what the protagonist had in mind. He watched as she carefully examined the items they had bought together. The clothes weren't exactly traditional human garments. They were a mix of human fabric and alien practicality, designed for comfort rather than fashion. Zalora had chosen something simple yet unique, a flowing, almost ethereal tunic that covered most of her body, but was designed in a way that allowed her to move freely. She didn't care for buttons, zippers, or anything that felt too restrictive, so she picked a piece that would allow her body to breathe. But even with her new compromise, Zalora was still determined to express herself in her own way. That afternoon, as the two of them left the apartment for the first time since their shopping trip, Zalora wore her new tunic with confidence, though it was clear it wasn't quite the same as what everyone else would wear. The protagonist couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. As they stepped into the bustling streets, he noticed the glances people gave them. Some were curious, others disapproving, but no one said anything outright. He could sense the tension rising in the air. He had been nervous about this moment since Zalora had insisted on walking around without clothes, and now he was feeling even more uncomfortable. There was something about being in public with her that made him anxious. What would people think of them? What if they judged Zalora? What if it all went wrong? Zalora, however, was completely unfazed. She walked alongside him, her stride confident and carefree, as if she had never doubted her decision for a second. People stared at her, their eyes wide with confusion or awe, but Zalora didn't seem to notice. To her, this was just how she was meant to be, and she wasn't about to hide herself away. She was proud of her alien form and didn't see why humans should be so obsessed with concealing their bodies. The protagonist, on the other hand, was acutely aware of every glance, every whisper. He felt like an outsider, caught between his desire to be supportive of Zalora and his own discomfort with how the world was reacting to them. He didn't want to admit it, but he was worried about how this might affect his life. He had never really questioned the social rules before, but now, with Zalora challenging them, he was forced to confront his own beliefs. As they passed a cafe, a group of people sitting at a table nearby stared at Zalora, whispering to each other. One of them muttered something about alien behavior and how it was inappropriate, while another person laughed nervously, clearly unsure of how to react. The protagonist felt his stomach churn. He wanted to tell them to mind their own business, but he knew that would only make things worse. Zalora, of course, didn't even seem to notice. She was focused on something much more interesting, a small robot walking by. "Is that a robot?" she asked, pointing toward it with wide eyes. The robot beeped and waved at her as it passed, clearly intrigued by the alien woman in front of it. The protagonist nodded, momentarily distracted by Zalora's fascination with the robot. "Yeah, that's one of the city's service bots. It helps with deliveries." Zalora smiled, her gaze following the robot as it continued down the street. She seemed oblivious to the people who were still watching them, whispering and casting glances at her. The protagonist tried to shake off his unease. "Maybe we should go back," he suggested quietly. "It's getting late and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Zalora stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious but calm. "I don't feel uncomfortable. I'm not the one worrying about what others think. You're the one feeling uncomfortable, not me. Why should I hide myself because others don't understand?" Her words cut through him like a sharp knife. He wasn't used to this kind of blunt honesty. It wasn't that he didn't agree with her. He did to some extent. But the world wasn't as simple as she made it sound. People had expectations, rules they followed, and breaking those rules could have consequences. "I just want to make sure you're okay," he said, feeling a little embarrassed. "People can be judgmental, you know? You don't know how they might react to something different." "I've seen worse," Zalora replied. "Back on my planet, I was always different. Always an outsider. I'm used to it. I don't care if they judge me." The protagonist paused, unsure how to respond. He respected Zalora's confidence, but at the same time he didn't want her to face unnecessary hardship. They were in a human city after all, and humans had their own rules. It wasn't like back on her planet, where everyone was probably more accepting of differences. As they walked down the street, a woman stopped them. She was holding a tablet and looked up at Zalora, eyes wide with curiosity. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tentative but friendly. "I couldn't help but notice your outfit. It's really unique. Is it some kind of alien fashion?" Zalora smiled brightly. "Yes, it is. I'm not from this planet, and I wanted to try something different. I don't see why humans need to wear so many layers. We should just let our bodies express themselves." The woman blinked a few times, clearly trying to process this. "Oh, well, it's certainly unconventional," she said slowly, "but I think it's kind of cool. It's like you're showing your true self. I can respect that." The protagonist was stunned. He had expected the woman to criticize Zalora, to make her feel uncomfortable, but instead, she was complimenting her. The interaction was brief, but it made him feel a little better. Maybe Zalora was right. Maybe the world wasn't as judgmental as he thought. Still, there were no guarantees, and he wasn't sure how long this would last. As they continued walking, he realized that Zalora wasn't just challenging the norms of society. She was challenging his own comfort zone, too. She was making him question everything he had grown up believing about clothing, about fitting in, and about what it meant to be truly free. Despite the uncomfortable stares and whispered comments, Zalora remained calm and confident, and for the first time, the protagonist began to feel like maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Maybe Zalora's way of thinking was something worth embracing, if only he could shake off his own doubts. The following days were quieter than the protagonist expected. Zalora had made her point, and now it seemed like everyone was learning to adapt. However, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that they were still on shaky ground. Zalora, with all her bold confidence, had stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just about the clothes anymore. It was about how she lived without caring what others thought. That wasn't something he had ever done, and it left him feeling conflicted. One evening, after a long day at work, the protagonist sat down on the couch, deep in thought. He was so caught up in his internal debate that he didn't hear Zalora enter the room. She stood quietly for a moment before sitting beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and curious, though. It carried a hint of concern. He turned to face her. "I don't know. I'm just thinking about everything. About us living together, and how different we are from each other." He paused, unsure how to continue. "I want to help you fit in, but I don't even know if I understand why I care so much about what people think." Zalora's eyes glinted in the dim light. "I told you already. You worry too much about how others see you, but maybe you're right. Maybe we need to meet halfway." The words took the protagonist by surprise. "What do you mean? You're not going to stop?" "I don't plan on covering up my entire body if I don't need to," she said with a small smile. "But I can try to make it easier for you, and maybe for me too. I guess there's something about fitting in that I still don't understand, but maybe it's something worth trying." Her tone was matter-of-fact, and the protagonist could tell she was genuinely considering it. It was a change from the stubbornness she'd shown before. Maybe they really could reach some sort of compromise. He wasn't sure how to feel about it, but a part of him was relieved. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel like you're losing yourself just because of me," he said, his voice sincere. Zalora shook her head gently. "I don't feel like I'm losing anything. I've learned a lot from you, more than I thought I would. Maybe I can take a little of your world with me, and you can take a little of mine." The idea of a middle ground was appealing. But what would that look like? The protagonist started thinking about what Zalora had said, that she didn't feel the need to wear clothes in the same way humans did. Yet perhaps there was some truth to the idea that blending their cultures could lead to something new, something better. The next day, they took a trip back to the tailor's shop. The protagonist didn't know exactly what he was expecting, but as soon as they walked in, the designer greeted them with a warm smile. "Back again?" the designer said. "You two have quite the unique dynamic. What can I help you with today?" Zalora stepped forward, her posture confident, but a little more subdued than before. She was wearing her simple tunic, but this time she wasn't walking around without clothes. She was open to change, even if it meant making small adjustments to fit in better with the world around her. "I think I'm ready to try something new," Zalora said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not giving up who I am, but I'd like to find something that feels right for me and still works here." The designer nodded and motioned for Zalora to follow him to the fitting area. As Zalora tried on a few more clothes, the protagonist found himself admiring her willingness to adapt without losing herself. It was a delicate balance between being true to who you were and respecting the world around you. Zalora tried a few outfits, each one more functional than the last. She found a loose-fitting blouse with a subtle design that flowed down to her knees. It wasn't tight, but it was long enough to make her feel comfortable in a crowd. The color was a soft blue, matching her skin tone in a way that was both natural and elegant. She also picked out a pair of simple trousers, more like leggings, that allowed her to move freely, but still covered enough of her body to blend in. The designer stepped back, nodding approvingly. "This will suit you perfectly. It's not too constricting, but it has a human touch. It'll help you fit in without losing your style." Zalora looked at herself in the mirror, turning slowly. The outfit wasn't quite like what humans typically wore, but it felt right. It wasn't covering everything, but it still gave her a sense of belonging. She glanced at the protagonist, who was standing off to the side, watching her carefully. "I think this works," Zalora said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "What do you think?" The protagonist felt a wave of relief wash over him. "It's perfect. It's you. But it's also a little bit of everything." Zalora chuckled softly. "Maybe I'll get used to these human clothes after all." She looked at the protagonist thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about fitting in. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's just about finding a way to live that makes sense for both of us." It was then that the protagonist realized how much he had grown through all of this. He had started the journey with the intention of helping Zalora fit in, but in the end, it was him who had learned the most. It wasn't about changing who you were to fit in with the world. It was about finding a way to exist in it while staying true to yourself. As they left the shop together, the protagonist couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Zalora had found a way to adapt, and so had he. They didn't have to abandon their differences. They just had to respect each other's space. Walking down the street, Zalora turned to him, her eyes bright. "You know, this could be the start of something new. Maybe we can both change the world, one outfit at a time." The protagonist smiled. "Maybe we can." The days that followed were filled with new discoveries for both of them. Zalora had, in her own way, embraced a part of human culture, while still holding on to her own sense of individuality. Her new outfit, a fusion of human and alien style, seemed to suit her perfectly. It wasn't too tight or restrictive, but it was still a step closer to blending in. She had a newfound confidence that the protagonist could see clearly, and it made him feel proud of how far they'd come. Zalora's change in attitude had also made her more open to learning about other aspects of human life, which was something the protagonist had hoped for from the beginning. It wasn't just about the clothes anymore. It was about understanding each other and finding common ground between their two worlds. One afternoon, the protagonist received an invitation to a large cultural event being held in the city, a gala of sorts, meant to bring together people from all walks of life to celebrate diversity. His first instinct was to decline. He knew Zalora would be uncomfortable. He'd seen the way people still reacted to her when they were out in public, and he didn't want to put her through it. But then, something about it made him hesitate. This could be an opportunity for Zalora to showcase her new sense of style to the world. It could be a way for both of them to truly test how far they'd come. He turned to Zalora with the invitation in hand. "There's an event coming up. I think it could be fun. You could wear your new outfit, and maybe we can get a taste of how people really react when they see something new and different." Zalora looked at the invitation, her eyes scanning it with interest. "A public gathering where humans celebrate diversity?" She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like an opportunity to show the world how much more open-minded they could be." The protagonist nodded. "Exactly. You could be a living example of how things can change. It might even help people get used to seeing things they've never seen before." Zalora stood in silence for a moment, considering the idea. "I've never been one to shy away from challenges," she said with a smile. "If anything, I want to challenge these so-called rules. Maybe, if people see me for who I truly am, they'll start seeing each other differently. The decision was made. They spent the next few days preparing for the event. Zalora was eager to try out her new outfit, and the protagonist was secretly excited about how she might present herself. As the evening of the event drew closer, there was an electric sense of anticipation between them. The protagonist had no idea what to expect, but he knew it would be a night they would never forget. The day of the gala arrived, and the two of them were ready. Zalora looked stunning in her new attire. The soft blue of her tunic highlighted her features in a way that was both elegant and striking. The outfit was comfortable and free-flowing, allowing her to move with ease while still covering her in a way that blended well with human society. She had kept her hair loose, letting it cascade down her shoulders, a striking contrast against her pale blue skin. She looked like no one else in the room, and that was exactly what she wanted. The protagonist, in his best suit, tried not to look too out of place as they entered the grand hall. He had never been to an event like this before, but it was hard to ignore the whispers as they walked past groups of people. Some people turned to look at Zalora, their eyes wide with curiosity and surprise, while others muttered to each other. The protagonist could sense the nervousness bubbling inside him again. How would they react to her? Zalora, however, seemed unfazed. She walked through the hall with her head held high, making eye contact with anyone who dared look her way. She wasn't hiding anymore. The fact that she was different didn't seem to bother her, and that gave the protagonist a strange sense of comfort. She was owning her uniqueness in a way that he had never seen before. As the night went on, something unexpected happened. A few brave individuals approached Zalora, asking about her outfit and where she came from. She shared stories of her home planet, explaining the philosophy of her people and their lack of need for clothing. The conversations were surprisingly open and welcoming. Some even complimented her on her courage, admiring her ability to stand out so confidently. The protagonist stood beside her, amazed at how easily Zalora was making connections with the people around her. She was a living example of what it meant to embrace who you truly were without concern for societal standards. People were starting to see her as more than just an alien. They were starting to see her as an individual with a unique perspective. Soon, word started to spread about Zalora's appearance. Some people gathered around her, intrigued by her style and her stories. Others simply stared, their discomfort clear on their faces. The protagonist could sense the tension still present in the room. While many were fascinated, others weren't ready to accept the change. But it was in that moment that he realized something important. Zalora was forcing them to question what they thought they knew about the world. She was challenging their biases without even trying, and that in itself was revolutionary. At one point, a woman came up to Zalora, clearly fascinated by her appearance. "You're different," she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and admiration. "But I can't help but think that maybe we've been going about it all wrong. Maybe we're the ones who need to change, not you." Zalora smiled warmly. "It's not about changing anyone. It's about understanding that there's more than one way to be. We're all different, and that's okay." The conversation lasted for several minutes, with the two women discussing how society's expectations of appearance were so ingrained that people rarely questioned them. The protagonist listened quietly, realizing that this event, this moment, was much bigger than either of them had expected. By the end of the evening, Zalora had become something of a symbol at the gala. People had taken notice, and the conversations she had sparked were slowly but surely changing their views. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. People were beginning to see that standing out wasn't something to fear. It was something to be embraced. As the night came to a close, Zalora and the protagonist left the event, both of them feeling proud of how far they had come. Well, Zalora said with a smile, I'd say tonight was a success. The protagonist laughed softly. Yeah, I think you might be right. You've changed more minds than you think. Zalora looked up at the stars as they walked home. Maybe. But it's not just about changing minds. It's about making room for everyone to be who they are, no matter what anyone else thinks. The protagonist smiled, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe Zalora's confidence was exactly what the world needed. Maybe it was time to embrace difference, to embrace change, and to see the world for what it really could be. After the gala, things seemed to shift in small but noticeable ways. The protagonist couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt like the world around him was changing, even if only a little. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of possibility, and it wasn't just because of the attention Zalora had attracted at the event. It was about how she had changed, how she had made him change without even trying. The next few days were quieter. Zalora continued to wear her new clothes, the ones they had designed together, and she seemed more comfortable than ever in her own skin. Her confidence was almost palpable, and the protagonist couldn't help but admire how easily she moved through life. For her, it wasn't just about wearing clothes. It was about living authentically, and that was something he had never truly understood until now. One evening, after a long day, they were sitting together on the couch, each with a drink in hand. The protagonist watched Zalora as she absent-mindedly twirled a small object between her fingers, deep in thought. There was something different about her. It wasn't just her outfit or the way she spoke. It was the way she saw the world. I think I understand now, Zalora said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost thoughtful. Understand what? The protagonist asked, leaning forward slightly. Why people care so much about how others see them. It's not about clothes or appearance. It's about identity. People wear these things because they want to feel secure in who they are. They want others to see them the way they see themselves, Zalora said, looking up at him. It's not about the clothes. It's about the connection. The protagonist sat back, absorbing her words. He had never thought about it that way. For him, clothes were always just a way to fit in, to avoid standing out. But for Zalora, it wasn't about fitting in at all. She was comfortable being different. And it made him start to wonder if maybe he had spent too much of his life trying to be just like everyone else. Zalora's words had hit home in a way he hadn't expected. It was like she had unlocked a new understanding of the world, not just for herself, but for him as well. He had always tried to blend in to avoid drawing attention. But now, with Zalora's influence, he realized that maybe it was okay to stand out. Maybe it was okay to be different. As they sat in silence, the protagonist thought about the past few weeks, the way things had shifted. When Zalora had first moved in, he had felt a strange sense of unease. Her lack of concern for societal norms had made him feel uncomfortable. But now, sitting here with her, he realized how much he had grown. He wasn't just learning about alien cultures. He was learning about himself. Zalora had shown him that it was okay to be vulnerable, to embrace what made him unique. The next morning, they decided to take a walk through the city. It was a crisp, sunny day, and the streets were filled with people going about their daily routines. The protagonist was surprised to find that he no longer felt as self-conscious walking beside Zalora. It was as if the fear of judgment had faded, replaced by a sense of confidence that he hadn't known he had. As they strolled through the park, Zalora was once again turning heads, though this time the protagonist didn't mind. People still looked at her, but there was no judgment in their eyes. Instead, they seemed to be curious, even fascinated. Some gave her a respectful nod, while others were too shy to approach her directly. It didn't bother Zalora. She simply walked through the crowd, her head held high, as if she was on a mission. Do you ever feel like you're too different? The protagonist asked, watching her closely. Zalora smiled, her eyes scanning the crowd. Different isn't bad. It's what makes us stand out. What's important is that we're true to ourselves. If I stopped being who I am just to fit in, I wouldn't be happy. And happiness is more important than fitting into someone else's idea of normal. Her words were simple, but they hit him deeply. For the first time, he felt like he was starting to understand what she meant. It wasn't about clothing or appearance. It was about authenticity. It was about living in a way that felt true to yourself, regardless of what others thought. They continued their walk through the park, and the protagonist found himself less concerned with how people were reacting to them. It was like a switch had flipped. Zalora's ability to be unapologetically herself had rubbed off on him. He didn't feel the need to hide anymore. He didn't need to blend in or follow the crowd. He could be himself, just like Zalora was. As they reached a quiet corner of the park, Zalora paused, looking out at the trees. "You know," she said, turning to the protagonist with a grin, "I think I could get used to this. Maybe this whole blending in thing isn't so bad after all, but I still don't think I'll ever fully conform." The protagonist chuckled. "I don't think anyone should fully conform, but it's nice to know there's a middle ground." "Exactly," Zalora agreed. "We can find balance. We can be true to who we are while still fitting into the world around us. It's all about choice." The protagonist nodded thoughtfully. The more time he spent with Zalora, the more he realized how much he had been holding back. Life didn't have to be about fitting into a mold. It was about finding your own path, one that made you feel complete and whole. By the time they returned to the apartment, the protagonist felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He wasn't carrying the same fears he had before. He was ready to embrace his own uniqueness, just as Zalora had done. It didn't matter what others thought. It only mattered that he was being true to himself. As Zalora headed into her room to change into something more comfortable, the protagonist sat on the couch, his mind racing with new ideas. Maybe it was time to start living a little differently, to start questioning the rules that had always governed his life. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace the new normal. The weeks after their quiet reflection in the park brought about a sense of calm, but also a sense of excitement. The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. It wasn't just the shift in how he saw the world, but how much Zalora had opened his eyes to new possibilities. Her confidence had done more than challenge societal norms. It had made him realize that change wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Zalora, too, seemed to be thriving in the new rhythm of their lives. Though she still preferred her alien style of dress, the compromise they had found, blending human fashion with her own natural form, had given her the freedom to feel at ease while still respecting the world around her. She was no longer the outsider she had once felt herself to be. Now, she was a bridge between two cultures, one that embraced the freedom of individuality and the other that adhered to traditions. One afternoon, Zalora approached the protagonist with a gleam in her eye, her voice full of excitement. "I have an idea. What if we created something? Something that would show the world that clothes don't have to define us, that individuality can exist within any society." The protagonist raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her enthusiasm. "What do you mean?" "I mean a whole new fashion revolution," she said, pacing excitedly. "We can start by designing clothes that work for both humans and aliens. Something that blends the best of both worlds. Something that says, we're all different, but that's what makes us beautiful." At first, the protagonist wasn't sure what she was getting at. But as Zalora explained further, her vision became clearer. She wanted to take her personal experience of blending her alien identity with human fashion and create something that anyone could wear, something that didn't confine anyone to a mold, but instead allowed them to feel true to who they were. "We'll start small," Zalora continued. "Maybe just a few pieces, clothing that can be worn in both human and alien societies. A tunic for the humans who want something more comfortable, and trousers for those who prefer flexibility. And then we can add personal touches, maybe even some accessories, like jewelry that holds meaning in both cultures. We'll make it stylish, but also practical. The protagonist, despite his initial hesitation, found himself excited by the idea. This wasn't just about clothing anymore, it was about creating something that would make people think. It was about creating a statement that said it was okay to be different, and that being yourself wasn't just acceptable, it was something to be celebrated. "Okay, let's do it," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "But where do we start?" Zalora's eyes lit up. "I've been talking to some of the designers I know. They're curious about the concept, and I think they'd be willing to help us get started. We'll just need to design a few prototypes, something simple but powerful. Then we'll showcase them at a larger event. I'm sure people will take notice." And so, they set to work. Zalora, with her alien insight, and the protagonist, with his understanding of human culture, began to sketch designs. They spent hours brainstorming ideas and talking about the meanings behind different fabrics, colors, and designs. Zalora was passionate, always pushing for something that would express the freedom she had come to value so much. The protagonist, at first uncertain, grew more and more invested as he realized how much of a statement this clothing could make. The designs were a mixture of both worlds. Some pieces were bold, with sharp lines and angular cuts, reminiscent of alien technology. Others were softer, flowing, and more comfortable, with patterns that reflected the diversity of human culture. They used natural materials from both worlds, combining comfort and style without compromising either. The clothing was meant to make the wearer feel like themselves, whether they were human, alien, or anything in between. When the first samples were ready, they invited a small group of people to try them on. Zalora was nervous, but excited. The protagonist, still unsure about the whole thing, tried to keep his nerves under control. What if people didn't get it? What if they rejected the designs? But the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People loved the idea. They saw the beauty in the combination of cultures and how the clothing allowed them to express themselves freely. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of how to wear such different styles, but after trying them on, they were hooked. The pieces felt fresh, modern, and comfortable, things that people didn't realize they'd been missing. Word spread quickly. The small experiment quickly turned into something much bigger. Fashion influencers, designers, and even celebrities took notice. People from different walks of life were suddenly wearing the new designs, embracing their own individuality while also celebrating the beauty of diversity. The clothing wasn't just a trend, it was a movement. Zalora was thrilled by the success, but she wasn't surprised. She knew that people longed for something different, something that would make them feel seen. The protagonist, on the other hand, was amazed at how quickly things had changed. What had started as a simple idea had blossomed into a full-blown fashion revolution, one that was challenging the very notion of what clothing should be. The duo continued to push boundaries, creating new collections that represented more than just fashion. Each new piece was a reminder that it was okay to stand out, to embrace differences, and to express oneself authentically. The clothing became more than just garments. It became a statement of identity and individuality, and people from all over the world began to embrace it. As the revolution grew, so did their message. They were no longer just creating clothes. They were creating a world where diversity was celebrated, not just accepted. People of all cultures, races, and backgrounds began to wear the pieces proudly, knowing that they were part of something larger than themselves. One evening, as they sat together in their apartment, reflecting on how far they had come, Zalora turned to the protagonist with a smile. "We did it," she said simply. The protagonist nodded, a sense of fulfillment settling over him. "We really did. I never thought we'd be able to create something like this. But here we are." Zalora leaned back, her eyes sparkling with pride. "And we didn't just change fashion, we changed the way people think. We showed them that being different is beautiful." The protagonist smiled, feeling the weight of her words. It was true. What had started as a simple compromise had turned into something much bigger, a movement that would last for years to come. And through it all, they had both learned the most important lesson. Being true to who you are, no matter what anyone else thinks, is the most revolutionary thing you can do.